Hello, hello, and welcome. My first guest is very special. This creator wrote the Pique My Interest jingle, made the website, and helps me so much with this podcast as a creative consultant. She is Lizzie Webb. She is also my wife, and was willing to be my first guest. I think it went fantastic, and built my confidence to continue to invite more artists on. As I mentioned in the pilot, I did attempt to get food with my guests before their interviews and tried to draw parallels from their favorite food to their craft. This was an attempt for me to try and make sweet potato pancakes into an art form. This episode was recorded very early on in the Pique My Interest process, so some of where she might be and the projects she mentions are over, but she is on to more projects, including more regional theaters and national tours. This episode was recorded in Kyla, Montana, and some time ago, and published now to me learning how to edit and publish a podcast, so some of the information might be a little old, but I hope you can still use all of the information to look up their work, and your interest is piqued. I hope that you are having a grand day, and please enjoy the first Pique My Interest interview I've titled, Just Wanna Do the Art Thing. Hello, my beautiful people, and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoob Decker, and I am an artist. This podcast was created to learn more about different styles of art forms and, more importantly, meet some incredible artists and explore their craft and how they create. I am here with Lizzie Webb, and we are in Kyla, Montana, and we just had some sweet potato pancakes. Why did we eat that today?
Because it was leftovers from Christmas dinner, and we wanted to use up what we'd made for Christmas, so we used roasted sweet potatoes and cooked a meal together.
So do you like to use leftovers when cooking, or do you like to start from scratch?
Both. When I have things that I can make with leftovers, then I go for it. I like to be creative and come up with weird new recipes using what I already have on hand.
All right. Wonderful, wonderful. Once again, I am here with Lizzie Webb, and she has piqued my interest about her craft. Now, can you pique my interest? What is your craft?
I'm a music director for Broadway-style musicals. The most recent one that I did was Anastasia, the national tour, which was the Broadway tour. And I worked on national tours, I worked in regional theater, did a show in New York, universities, community theater, summer stock. I've kind of done it all.
So what's your background? How did you get started in music directing in theater?
I started off as an aspiring actor when I was really young. That's what I wanted to do. And then I started playing piano and accompanying choirs and small singing groups and church. And when I went to college, I started studying piano performance. In the summer after my first year of school, I got recommended for a last-minute theater job playing piano for a show in eastern Montana in Fort Peck. And so I took the job last minute, and when I got there, I had to learn the show in a few days, and we started performances about 6 days after I got there. And I realized that I could take what I love to do on stage and combine it with my piano skills and create a way to make a living and a way to work in theater that wasn't being on stage.
I know, as somebody who's in musical theater a lot, I try and explain certain things to people who aren't in theater and their craft. Can you explain to me a little bit about what you do from the beginning of your process? How do you start from nothing into, holy moly, I've got this Broadway national tour that needs to sound amazing? How do you get started with that?
Well, it depends on the show that I'm doing and where it's happening. Recently, I am not involved in the casting process. I don't get to see who the people are beforehand. So it's a lot of work on my own to sort of learn who sings what. This most recent show, I use their resumes and I look at what they've done before, and I decide who's going to sing what part, who's going to sing the high stuff, who's going to sing the low stuff, and I make a big table, like a chart, and I chart out the entire show, and it's a lot of paperwork. And then from there it goes to, if the cast that I'm working with is going to need recordings, I will make recordings for them so that they can have recordings of their own parts, recordings of the accompaniment. And then we get started with rehearsals, and I teach the music to the singers, try to teach all the big numbers first, like the big songs, so that everyone has a good grasp on the music before they start dancing, because that's really important. And then we are in the rehearsal process, and I'll be playing the piano usually during rehearsals for dance rehearsals, blocking rehearsals. Then the orchestra comes in, and I have rehearsals with them outside of the cast rehearsals. We go through everything. If things need to be rewritten for the instruments we have, then I have to rewrite stuff from different books to be played by another instrument, because a lot of times you're not dealing with an orchestra that's the full size of the orchestra. You're dealing with a smaller group of musicians. And then we put it all together in what's called a Sitzprobe, which means to basically sit and sing. And the orchestra plays, and the cast gets to sing with the orchestra for the first time. It's usually one of the most exciting rehearsals of the process. Then we have tech rehearsals, where we put everything on stage and practice all of the technical elements. Then we start dress rehearsals, where the orchestra is part of it. And then we open.
So, and then you're open.
Yeah, and then we open and we perform for the world.
And you break a leg.
And as, depending on the length of the run, like the length of the performances, if you got like a really long run, for example, a national tour, you'll usually have rehearsals a couple times a week to keep everything fresh, to rehearse with your understudies, and every now and then you'll have a put-in rehearsal where you put new cast members into the show or put understudies into the show so they get to practice doing it. But in the shorter runs, usually once you're up and running, then you show up to the theater and you do the show.
So it's a lot more doing your research, figuring out who these actors are, what kind of instruments that you want, similar to doing leftovers, kind of taking things that you're finding in the fridge to create something else, rather than something like composing, where you're kind of just like scrambling your brain for new material, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of what a music director does, we interpret what already exists on the page. Now, a director and a choreographer, they have a little more artistic freedom, I guess, than the music director, because with the music director, we are literally taking what is written down on a page in lyrics and music, teaching it to a cast, and adjusting as needed for who we have. Whereas a choreographer can start completely from scratch and create choreography from the ground up. We're working with sort of an already existing framework as a music director, but nothing else can happen without that framework.
So it's a pretty unique department in the sense that it's kind of already established, and your job is to just make it sound good.
Yeah, and it's working with what you have and adjusting what exists on the page to either the amount of people that you have, the skill level that you have, the needs of the departments. You have to really work with every department. You know, a lot of times the choreographer, let's say, won't have as much to do with the sound department because their fields don't intersect as much. But the music director has to work with all of the departments, except maybe lighting. But I've had some issues with lighting too, where they've had to light our music stands using the light board, and I've had to tell them, yes, that will work, no, that won't work, because we need to be able to read our music, and we can't have colors changing on our music stands as we read music. So you do have to work with every department and put all of the aspects of the show together, and the music kind of touches everything in a musical.
As artists, we constantly find ourselves second-guessing ourselves and our process. I would consider you a very successful music director. You're doing Broadway-style shows on Broadway national tours. What do you consider a successful music director? And do you consider yourself a successful music director?
I would definitely say I'm a successful music director. I still don't work 52 weeks a year. I have to scramble to find jobs just like other artists do, particularly people in the music and theater world. We are gig performers, basically, where we go from job to job and try to piece together an existence. And I think you can be successful in any capacity. You don't have to be working full-time as an artist or a creator to consider yourself successful. I feel like when I was doing community shows and university shows, I was extremely successful. I was overworked, underpaid, stressed out beyond belief.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. But I felt very successful in what I was doing, given a few years of different work, some of it not theater related at all. I think success is defined differently in different periods of your life. I would never want to go back to where I was when I was literally working nonstop all the time. I don't think I'd want to go back there. So finding a work-life balance is also a form of success.
Yeah.
Because I'm able to come home for periods of time and enjoy myself, and I'm able to enjoy the work that I'm doing rather than just churning it out all the time.
Now, somebody like a painter or a sculptor can probably find some success in selling their piece or having people talk about your product. Music directing, it's almost like to be successful, it just sounds the way it's supposed to sound. Like you're probably not going to get too many compliments. If anything, people will just tell you if they didn't think it sounded good. And how do you take that criticism onto the next project? Do you try and take it with a grain of salt? Do you try and really take that in and be like, you know what, I agree, that didn't sound the best, but I'm going to apply that to my next process? Or, like I said, the level of success that you said might just be listening to the cast complete the show 100% all the way through. And that's kind of where I'm curious. As artists, we're always trying to achieve success and, if anything, just self-approval and whatnot. So I'm just curious, like, how do you take criticism from other people, other artists, and apply that to your craft?
Well, like you said, a lot of times the music and the sound department don't get noticed unless they're bad. It's really unfortunate because they are two departments that work really, really hard in the theater, and their product is so, like I said, the other pieces of the show can't happen without the music. It can't happen without good sound. And the only time you really get noticed is when it's bad. There's not even a Tony Award for music directing. And so, like, often we get just, it's a hard field to be quantified and to say, yes, that was excellent music direction because every show, it's really hard to compare. So there have been times when certain projects I've done have been, in my opinion, much more successful than others. And you always take the feedback that you get from every job and you try to use it to be better on the next one. But I would say that the most helpful feedback and information that I can get is knowing when you've worked with what you have and made that sound its absolute best. For example, I did a show where barely anyone had sung before. In the show, Pippin, we had a few people in the show that were like singers, but most of our ensemble hadn't ever really done a musical or sung before. And it was just a really proud moment when we put that show together and those people that had never sung before got up on stage and had a product that they could be proud of. Now, whether every single audience member that watched it was blown away, they probably weren't. But those of us that were involved in it were really proud. And some of those moments are even more satisfying than when you work with professional companies that they don't even need to work that hard to get the material down, because you don't have to work that hard to make it sound good. But when you get to work with a community theater production or a university production or an amateur group or something, and you make something really great out of a group of people that might not necessarily be the most proficient musicians, it's pretty satisfying.
I want to go back to the beginning process of music directing. Artists always have their own process of starting. They like to hunker down in their bedroom and listen to music. Some people like to go for a run and just let the outside world influence them. How do you get started, and do you have any tips for any aspiring music directors on how to get started?
Well, the way that I got started music directing, because I played piano for shows for a few years before I actually music directed anything, and I was just always willing to help where help was needed. I think that's, especially in collaborative art forms like theater, it's really important to remember that every piece is necessary and your part of the show isn't possible without the rest of the departments and the rest of the pieces. And so the more willing you are to put yourself out there and offer to do more, the more likely the show or the project is to succeed. And so I basically just offered up my services when I was playing the piano for shows and ended up sort of becoming the assistant music director, even though I wasn't necessarily called the assistant music director. And it wasn't until 2 years after I was sort of doing that I even music directed for real for my first time. It was 2 years of me like just playing piano for shows and helping to teach music where they needed it. I would conduct the orchestra. Basically, I was the band leader for the shows that I was playing for. And I just showed that I was willing to do what it took to get the show up and running. And then finally, my final year of college, which was 2 years after I had played, well, actually it was 4 years after I had played piano for my first show, but it was 2 years after I had started like offering up my services to help the music director. That's when I music directed my very first show by myself. And it was terrifying. I did things that I would never, ever do now. But it was a learning experience. And I'm grateful for it. So my suggestion would just be to like be open to any of the possibilities that someone throws your way. Don't ever think that, oh, this isn't good enough for me, or or the opposite, I'm not good enough for this, because you aren't necessarily the best judge of that for yourself. So I just would suggest and recommend just trying anything you can that gets thrown your way, because it's all going to lead to growth no matter what. Whether it's learning what you don't want to do in the future, which has happened so many times. I'm never going to stop learning that. Like, don't do that again.
So it seems like the biggest piece of advice is just, it seems like it's time. Like, no matter what, when you start, it's just going to be a long time, and in your case, years before you started to catch a break in some form. But it also seems like you wanted to take on anything and everything. And is it hard to say no to a project? And is it important to say no? Because you don't want to like overload your brain with projects and crafts and then just kind of not be able to spend the time on a certain project.
Yeah, or burn out. I've said no to a couple of things before, either because I was just way too busy or because it just wasn't the right project for me. I've been asked to submit for things that I just know that I shouldn't do. One of them was like The Color Purple. I got asked to submit to be a music director for that, and I didn't even do it. And I told them, you should look for a person of color to music direct this, because the whole cast who is going to be singing this music are people of color, and they deserve to have a music director who understands their instrument and who understands the material too. Just not okay to be involved in something that you really shouldn't. But then other times the timing just doesn't work out, and I am already doing something else, and I don't really feel like overcommitting, don't feel like burning out. Back in the day when I was teaching at university and doing community theater and doing regional stuff, I felt like I couldn't ever say no to anything, because you feel like you're just going to wither away into oblivion if you don't take every single project that you're offered. But like I said earlier, a measure of success isn't always how many projects you're doing or the scale or the scope of project you're doing. Sometimes it's the ability to just enjoy your life while also working on a project that you really like.
So there's a very fine balance between doing your craft and staying sane, really.
Yeah.
But speaking of balance, as you said before, you don't work yourself to the bone with this job just because there might not be the opportunity, or you might not have a gig lined up. What do you do outside your craft to either promote more creativity or something that's just completely opposite, to just get your mind off it? Do you have any hobbies or interests?
Yeah, I pretty much have never met a craft project that I didn't love. So I started quilting about 10 years ago, and on my off time I try to do some sewing and quilting, and then I realized that that's not a very transportable project. It's not a portable hobby. So one of my friends was a crocheter, and he gave me a hook and gave me some yarn and said, here's a YouTube video, they'll teach you how. And I was pretty much hooked. And so I started crocheting, and it was such a good portable project. And I would do that. I mean, I would crochet during rehearsal. There's a lot of time in rehearsal where I just sit at a piano and I don't do anything. And so I would just sit and crochet, and it's very easy to pick up and put down when you're in rehearsal. And then I decided to start knitting, and picked that up and ran away with that. I have to be careful with all three of those, though, because there have been times where I can't do them while I'm doing a show because they hurt my hands and my wrists.
Ah!
Yeah, and so I have to put them away. And I didn't pick up my knitting needles the entire year that I was on tour with Anastasia because the music was just too hard. And if I got myself into a place where like I was obsessed over knitting, my hands would cramp up and my tendonitis would flare up, and I wouldn't be able to play the show. So I just decided it was probably better to not And on Anastasia, I had to conduct the orchestra too, and that it's the same exact muscle that you use to conduct that you use to knit, and it's the same muscle that flares up when you overwork it. And so I just decided to stop. But I picked up the needles again the other day for the first time.
Yeah.
I try to just like, and I mean, I've done all sorts of silly art projects.
Do you think that those silly art projects complement your craft in music directing? Do you think they contradict your craft? Do you think it's just like a completely separate entity to get your mind off of it?
I think it's a separate entity to get my mind off of it. I definitely have some like ADHD tendencies, and knitting and crocheting and quilting is so mathematical and like pattern oriented that you can really lose yourself in it without letting your mind wander. You have to keep counting, and you have to keep in the pattern. And so it's a good way to keep my mind focused even when I am in the room. I can knit and crochet and have my ears completely open to everything that's going on around me, but my brain is focused on the number of stitches I'm at, and it helps me to stay focused on what's going on around me in the room. So I think it's a great way to clear my mind and to keep myself from wandering, but also to give me something to do with my hands and to create something. I love at the end of doing a project having something tangible when you're done. It's a just satisfying feeling, and my little ADHD brain wants to like have something at the end to reward myself with, because a lot of times in a musical you do your show and you perform and then you're done, and afterwards it's like, what do I have? I've got a poster, I guess, unless your cast does a recording. There's not something tangible that you get to keep.
No, I'm with you. I am an avid crocheter, and when I do shows, I will make a project during that show that's influenced by the story, by a song, and then I name all of my projects, and I'll name it after one of the songs, and that is my collectible at the end.
Yeah,
I get to wear this hat inspired by a show I got to do, and
you have a little thing to keep with you, and you can look back and remember like, oh yeah, I remember sitting on a bus going through the Virginia mountains when I was making this, or after I was quilting for a while, I started hand quilting so I could take it with me. And I remember the show 9 to 5. I was working on that show, and I was making all of these little tiny quilt pieces by hand. So every time I look at those little quilt pieces, they have not been turned into a quilt, by the way, but they are sitting in a box behind me. But every time I will look at those, I'll remember what shows I was doing when I was making that. And I just finished the hand warmers that I was making during Beauty and the Beast, which was the last show I did before the pandemic. And they have roses on them and vines, which are sort of inspired by Beauty and the Beast and the rose and all of that. And so I think that it's always good to have other things, because it's in theater is a very dramatic place. And it's really easy to get caught up in all the drama. And when you have other creative outlets, it helps you to remove yourself from the drama or the stress of your field. Yeah. Because it's not a stressful, crocheting and knitting is not a stressful thing for me. It's just sort of, I pick it up when I want to and I put it down.
Oh, I've yelled at my project before.
Well, yeah.
So it seems like it just all comes down to what we mentioned before, just balance.
Yeah.
Having a good balance in your life and your craft. I'm going to switch your gears a little bit. What makes your craft different from others? What separates your music directing from other music directing?
Oh, boy.
What makes you stand out from a different music director, a community theater music director versus a Broadway music director versus a touring music director? What is so special about your art?
Well, I think I'm special because I've done it all. I am very used to having to do every part of the music department of a show. It's only been the last few years that I've started doing productions where I'm not the one that has to do all of it. But I do think that the fact that I came from a background where I have been the accompanist, I've been the vocal music director, I've been the conductor, I have been in the show, I have been a dance captain, I have taught little kids, I have taught adults, I have taught professionals, and I have taught people who have never sung a note in their life.
So you're just the Lizzie of all trades.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can adapt to whatever situation I'm in. The most recent show I did was Anastasia, and it was actually so incredible to just be able to do my job and not have to do everyone else's job too. I got to just play the piano for the show. I got to learn how to conduct. That was a brand new skill for me. And then there was one moment when our music director wasn't there and I was the assistant music director, and he was not in the town we were in, and I needed to teach some music to people. And so I was able to work with singers on the show and do what I usually do. But that was like only one time that I had to do that. And it was refreshing. But coming up in 2 days, I'm back to being the one that does it all with my next job. So
it's just constantly changing.
Yeah, and adapting and not feeling not feeling like there is only one way to do your job. Because you're going to be working with so many different artists. Every cast you have is different. Every creative team you have is different. Every production team you have is different. Spaces are different. Like, you just have to be willing to change it up and adjust what you're doing to fit the needs of whatever you're doing.
So it seems like your specialty is kind of being able to take anything and music direct it, but you're also willing to be able to step back and say, I'm uncomfortable with this, and be able to recommend somebody else.
Oh yeah, jazz is not my jam.
No jazz.
I wouldn't.
No swinging.
No, swing is different than jazz. I wouldn't do. I don't think I would never be able to do like an improv musical or a traditional jazz musical.
It's a very different art form in there. That's very coming up with
so
things
different.
On the spot. No.
Yeah, and I know the people to recommend for those jobs, and I'm willing to recommend them when I'm not right. Recently, I've done more classical style musicals, like more of the classics, and also Disney. I've done a lot of Disney.
Everyone loves Disney.
Yeah, and I think it's because I work with kids a lot, and I love Disney. Like, don't get me wrong, but I used to do like a lot of pop musicals and rock musicals. Those were kind of my thing. And then all of a sudden I just kind of like stopped getting those jobs. It was very interesting. It was kind of like I don't know, it messed with my mind for a little while because I was like, that's not what I do. But again, it was me putting these limitations on myself and thinking like, oh, that's not what I do. So, but who am I to... I mean, you know yourself, but also some other people might see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And turns out I'm actually really good at classic musical theater and more traditional musical theater because it has those parameters. It has structure, and I'm really good with structure, and I'm really good at reading notes on a page. But I do get to do something different this year, which I'm excited for.
Do you recommend to go to school or to take classes on your craft?
Yeah. I think a music director has to have an education in some way, shape, or form. I don't think you don't have to go to the best schools. I mean, I graduated with a degree in communication studies from undergrad. I did not have a music degree because they didn't have a department for musical theater when I was in undergrad. So there wasn't really an outlet for what I wanted to do. I went to school for classical piano, and then I realized, oh my God, I hate memorizing music. It stresses me out. So I then, the summer after my freshman year of college, got recommended for this musical theater job, realized I can combine my passion for theater and acting and whatnot, and my talent at the piano, and my skills at teaching music, and I can do it all. And I went back to school the next year, and I did one more year. I did a year of music education because I was like, okay, I could do music education, learn all these different instruments, learn how to teach them, then use that in musical theater. And then my junior year, I started doing shows in Missoula, where my school was, and trying to use them towards my degree, and I was told no. So after my junior year, I quit the music department. I had enough credits for a minor, so I got a music minor, and I just picked another degree that was easy to get, and I picked communication studies, and I did 2 years of that and graduated in 5 years. Communication studies, minor in music. Didn't even finish like music theory, which is the thing that I kick myself for all the time, because it's just you have to have it to be doing what I do. And then I took a year off, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And one of my mentors said, why don't you come back to school? We have a musical theater grad program, and you can basically write your own program. So I kind of wrote my own program in the music department and got a master's of music in musical theater, and took all the classes in undergrad that I really should have taken when I was in school, but I was stubborn and quit. So yes, roundabout answer, yes. You need to take classes, you need to take lessons, you don't need a degree, but you have to educate yourself to do this job.
Yeah, you had an undergrad in communication, like completely different than musical theater.
Yeah.
Do you think that has transposed into musical theater? Do you think that what you studied in college has helped you?
It helps me in the business side of things, for sure. A lot of musicians are really like flighty and unreliable. It's just a bad misconception that is unfortunately made true by a lot of people, because we're artists and we have art brains. But I went to school and I learned how to communicate with people. I like to call communication studies degree, the one I got, it was like business light. It was like, I didn't get my business degree, but it was like learning how to communicate on a business level. And so it helped me to be a better manager, because a music director really is a manager. You are a manager of a department. More so than a lot of times the director and the choreographer. You end up managing a lot of different departments. And so you have to be able to speak the language of the different departments and communicate clearly. So yeah, it really helped me to be a better music director in the business sense of things, and marketing myself and putting myself out there and just being more professional. Because you're not taught that's not really something that is in a lot of music schools or conservatories, is how to be a business person and how to market yourself and how to be professional. It's not taught.
No,
you get like one class on that, and usually it's not like super helpful.
Yeah.
And we all know what class that is.
No, as artists, that's one of the biggest things. It's its own art form, is learning how to advertise yourself and how to promote yourself. And no,
because we just want to do the art thing.
We just want to do the art thing.
We just want to be artists. We don't want to have to do the other work that's like writing professional emails and trying to like market yourself. We just want to make art.
You brought up a misconception that you had. As artists, I always feel that there's a lot of misconceptions on what we do from non-artists. Are there any others in your world that you think people don't know about musical theater directing or think that they know all about it and you're here to just shatter their dreams?
I mean, there were a lot of misconceptions that I had when I first started. I thought that music directing was just teaching the notes on the page. And I've said it so many times that, like, you have this framework that you work within, but you have to be able to adjust it for the best needs of the people you're working with and the production you're working with. And so a lot of people have this misconception of music directors that we literally just teach the notes on the page and that's it. And it's a misconception that other artists have of us. It's a misconception that a lot of young music directors have of the field, is that if you know how to teach music on a page, that you can be a successful music director. And there are just so many more little details that go into it that are way more important than teaching the music on the page. Like diction and cutoffs are almost more important than the notes on the page. Because if your audience doesn't understand what the actors are saying or singing, then the production means nothing. Literally, they don't understand what you're saying and what you're singing. So, yeah, I think a lot of people oversimplify music directing and think that it's just teaching the notes on the page, and that's probably why it's hard to quantify what we do, because for every production it's so different. You're doing so many different things. Like I'm cutting down an orchestra right now from 15 to 7, I think. And that's just going to be a whole project in itself.
This is just changing a little bit. What inspires you? What makes you want to be the best music director you can be?
Honestly, it's usually the actors that I'm working with. And it's seeing how other people interpret the music. When someone, no matter how great of a singer they are, when they can interpret the music in a certain way, it's really inspiring. It makes me want to interpret the music to a deeper level as well. Rather than just teaching the notes on the page, when someone brings something more to it, it makes me want to bring something more to it, which I think then makes them want to bring even more. And it just keeps building. And it works that way with the actors I work with. It works that way when I watch choreographers and directors, and when I watch other people putting everything that they have into it, then it makes me want to up my game even more.
Just working together and building off each other.
It's the working together. You cannot create theater in a vacuum. You can't do it yourself. You have to work with other people.
Yeah,
you have to collaborate.
It is a unique art form in that sense that I talked about painters and sculptors, but really, I mean, a lot of musicians and crocheters and knitters. I mean, it's all by yourself. But theater, I mean, unless you want to be an actor, producer, director, musician, all of the above in the same one-person show, you just can't do it. Even then, you still need people running boards. You got to have people backstage. So, no, I completely agree that theater specifically just requires such a collaboration and communication, and especially with a background in communication studies, I can see how you'd be very successful in your craft. What's next for music directing? Are we start seeing anything changing in the world? Do we see it moving towards something else?
Yeah, I'm not going to put a qualitative statement on this, because to each their own. And I've done a variety of different styles of shows that have different styles of music in them. But digital music and pre-recorded music is definitely coming up there, and tracks are a big part of musical theater now, because you can have a full sound of an orchestra without having a full set of musicians.
What's a track?
Basically, you're basically a karaoke track. It's like the whole orchestra is recorded digitally. Some companies are doing it where they record orchestras live and then they sell the recordings and the software that you need to run the show. And you basically are pushing a button instead of playing the music. And that is a new way for theaters to make it work, make a big sound without as much of a financial
Seems a lot more
impact.
affordable too.
Yeah, it's way more affordable. But it takes away that live aspect and the collaboration. It takes away the ability for the music to move with the actors and the singers. It's not collaborative. It's definitely for show. It's definitely a way to have a big sound if you don't have the budget. But the problem is a lot of theaters are doing it, even if they do have the budget, because it's just easier than having live musicians.
And anybody who's ever gone to a theater can really feel the difference between a live orchestra and pre-recordings or digital recordings, and especially on stage. As an actor, I mean, you can just tell when the orchestra is moving with you rather than you are trying to just be this robot all the time.
Yeah, and there are some like halfway points. There are some software that's like combining both live and pre-recorded that's really cool. There's some really, really amazing software and technical advances that have happened that make it so that you can have some live musicians and some pre-recorded, and so that it can move with the live musicians. Anastasia was an example of that. We had a program called Notion that a live musician played the keyboard to have the program read the music and then output the sounds of the orchestra members we were missing. And it was a lot better than past shows that I've done that have had a click track for the entire show, pre-recorded music for the whole show, and then the small band is just playing along to that. So that's sort of where things are going, but I think that as with anything, it's gonna have another bounce back. Like, people are going to realize that, we should. It's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So
almost getting a live band will be almost abstract and kind of like nostalgia.
And valleys and yeah.
I mean, it's such an interesting idea to me that I've seen you work, and you are so technologically driven. You rely on technology to music direct.
I do.
But at the same time, technology is almost the death of art nowadays. We're starting to see technology replace artists in functioning worlds, like music directing.
But then you find, I don't want to make it seem like I'm trashing technology in art, because I'm not. Because you find people who are creating absolutely incredible things with this technology. You find keyboard programmers who can literally make a keyboard sound like a full orchestra. And they programmed it on a computer, and then they can also play it to make it sound like a full orchestra. And, you know, our Notion programmer and our keyboard programmers for Anastasia, those sounds were beautiful. And it was pretty incredible. And they've done programming for, you know, almost every big Broadway show that uses that kind of technology. It's just, you have to make it work to sound good with you, and you have to work to sound good with the technology. And when you embrace it and when you accept it and work with it, it can be really incredible. Our music supervisor on Anastasia always said that about Notion and about the keyboards. He said, you have to work with it. You can't fight it. and you have to work with it, and it can sound amazing. And it did.
Seems like today's word is balance. Balance, balance, balance. Artists plus technology, artists plus themselves, artists working with other artists, artists working with inner struggles and trying to find something outside of theater. It's all about balance and trying to find that inner zen with your art. So that's about wrapping it up. I just want to know what's next for you personally. I'm curious. Is there any more endeavors that you will be going forth with music directing?
Yeah. I mean, if you are somewhere in the country that the Anastasia tour is on, I would highly recommend going and seeing that, even though I'm not on it anymore. It's a beautiful piece of theater, and we worked super hard to get that show where it is today. And even though I'm not on it anymore, you can still see a lot of the work that I helped to create the show as the assistant music director. But tomorrow I get on an airplane and I go to Arizona. I go to Phoenix for the first time in 5.5 years. And I'm going to be music directing Mame at Arizona Broadway Theater. And then right after that, I'm doing Escape to Margaritaville, which is the one that I'm actually like really, really excited for. It's my first time doing a more modern musical that's not like a Disney. I would say Anastasia is like a cross between Disney and classic musical theater. It's got a lot of really classic elements and classical elements because it was based in Russia and has a lot of Russian music in it. Lots of really heavy piano. And then other than that, I did The Wizard of Oz and Beauty and the Beast forever. And so this is going to be my first like modern contemporary musical. And it's Jimmy Buffett, and I'm actually probably one of the only musicians in the world that's really excited to do this show. I think it's a hilarious, fabulous show. I think they use the Jimmy Buffett music to weave into the story, and I'm really excited to hopefully be on stage and play music in a band on stage wearing some form of parrot headgear. I don't know what I'm gonna wear, but I'm gonna push for being on stage and being dressed up for that one. And Jimmy Buffett plays in Phoenix the night before we open.
Ooh.
Yeah, he has a concert there. So hopefully that'll get like the whole valley excited about Jimmy Buffett. They'll be like jacked up on cheeseburgers in paradise and want to come out and see Escape to Margaritaville.
So again, if you want to see Lizzie music direct with some classic musical theater, you can visit her in Phoenix, Arizona, doing her classic Mame, or you can see a much more modern musical, Escape to Margaritaville, also at Arizona Broadway Theater. I am currently in Montana, and so I am hoping to just continue to pique my interest all the way across this state and further. Let me know if there are any artists or art forms that you think I should explore more. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourself. Be kind to each other. I just want to thank you, Lizzie, for being here and piquing my interest. I'm Scoob, and thank you for listening to me pique my interest.